Hello everyone, welcome to the party. My name is Josef Lentsch. I'm the founder and publisher of PartyParty, your backstage access to insights on political parties, changemakers and trends across Europe. So the next EU election will take place from 6 to 9 June 2024. At the last election, the Conservative European People's Party came first, Party of European Socialists came second, Liberals came third, and Greens came in fourth. Now we are 1 year ahead of the next European election in 2024. So we want to take a look ahead with the general secretaries of the 4 European parties. This is a first-time experiment. Thank you all very much for coming. Let me quickly explain to you and your audience at home how this will work. I will introduce our speakers, then we will cover different topics from organization to strategy. The audience can ask questions via Mentimeter, and of course also you will be able to ask questions of each other. But first, introductions. With me today are Thanasis, Bakolas, the General Secretary of the European People's Party. A warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Giacomo, Filibeck, the Executive General Secretary of the Party of European Socialists. Welcome as well. Didrik, the Schaetzen, General Secretary of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Welcome. And Benedetta de Marte, General Secretary of the European Greens. Let's start. I kindly ask you to, for short and concise answers, we have a lot to cover. First and foremost, let's start with organization. Benedetta, if I may start with you. Perhaps not everyone will know what the role of General Secretary is actually about when it comes to an EU election. Can you give us a little bit of an insight what this actually entails with your role?
Yes, hi, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here, also to start this. Not very pleased to be the only woman on the stage. Normally I don't participate in panels where I'm the only woman, but I made an exception because I think that this was very worth occasion. Role of Secretary General in a European political party and in a EU election is, in our case, to be for sure the link between our political mandate and the team that executes the campaign. So I am, of course, both an elected member of our board and the manager of the organization. So, of course, I am in charge, and I guess for my colleagues is more or less the same, of making sure that the mandate for our campaign, both from our committee, from our board, and from our parties, is executed according to the guidelines that we receive, and of course to manage the whole execution of the campaign together with our campaign manager, who will be working closely with me on the whole duration of the campaign, and make sure that also, of course, the member parties are involved, that they know what the common campaign is going to be about, that they can participate. We have a very participatory and inclusive way of organizing the campaign, which of course we can elaborate afterwards, but that's mostly my role.
Thank you very much. So you talked about execution, so it's very much about delivery. It's you know, general secretaries, as you said, maybe the persons who put the show on the road.
The strategy, of course.
And the strategy. So Didrik, if I may continue with you. So there, of course, is the party, we already heard, and there are the party boards, but there's also the group, and again, something that may not, you know, not everyone may know that. What's actually, also in the context of the EU 2024 election, what's the relation between the party and the parliamentary group, and also what's your role as Secretary General in this interplay?
Actually, I'm quite lucky because right now I'm combining Sec Gen ad Interim, but also campaign director, and I was nominated by our council in October last year. I was active in that same position for the previous campaign also, and I think this is a bit for European political parties a moment to shine, where the group has a big role during the electoral mandates of the parliament and probably more visibility. It's around elections that we really take a role, because groups cannot party, cannot campaign, sorry. They can party. Thank you, I fully support, they can definitely party, but they cannot campaign.
I seriously don't.
But they cannot campaign. And so I think that is the element where we have, or added value, where we have to show. And this has been, in the previous elections, really turned around lead candidates that we put forward. Very operational campaigns are about negotiating various debates between lead candidates. You say this is the first time we meet as sections, and I think you're right. For this We will meet again next week in another format, which I think is good news. But where this will be is that we will have front bearers that will carry your ideas for the campaign, and coordinating that role is the biggest one. I'm quoting the former deputy secgen of EPP that says running an EU campaign is a little bit like playing football in the dark with a square football. So it's not very easy because you cannot vote directly for us. However, there is a role that we can play indeed in this, particularly with our lead candidates.
Thanks very much, Didrik. Giacomo, we already heard, playing football in the dark. We heard of the interplay between the board and the group and the party. From your perspective, and looking ahead now 1 year to June 2024, what do you see as some of your biggest challenges, and how you want to go about them as a Secretary General of a political party?
So first of all, also thank you for organizing this. It's a pleasure to see our colleagues around the same table. I also follow the rule of not sitting in a panel when there are only men, but thanks God, Benedetta decided to give us the grace of sharing with us the table, so here we are. I think that our main task as a Secretariat of the Party of European Socialists is to propose, mediate, negotiate, and then execute. We are now beginning the procedure that will lead us to a Congress by the end of the year, where we will adopt a major resolution. On that basis, we will then identify the key political lines that will inform our political manifesto, our electoral manifesto, that will be adopted at another Congress, the so-called Electoral Congress, that will take place at the beginning of 2024. And that would be the kickstart of the campaign, when we will also appoint, elect, nominate the lead candidate for the position of the President of the Commission. So our task in this process is to make sure that we provide all our member parties and member organizations the key proposals that we would like to be at the center of our campaign. We identify with them what are the most important items and issues, and then we deliver them during the campaign by executing them jointly as a collective effort.
Thank you very much. So quite a journey ahead. Thanasis, you as a General Secretary, of course, of such a big European party, there are many member parties also national level, right? And in every country, the situation is a bit different. The topics are a bit different. How do you navigate such a complex landscape as a General Secretary on the European level? How do you keep those parties aligned, and how do you direct them in a certain message and direction?
Delicately.
Delicately? What does it mean?
A political party, unlike the group, for example, is accountable to our member parties. We serve their interests. It's when you are a big tent, like we are, encompassing centrists and liberals, Christian Democrats, as well as conservatives, with sometimes very differing views on issues, including, for example, fiscal responsibility and what that really is, and that's just one example. It is a continuing and constant challenge. But for us at the European People's Party, this has been something we've been doing for decades. And our strength and our belief comes from the fact that not only do the great majority of our parties embrace all these various movements, in a way, and try to find common ground, but we do the same thing as a pan-European party as well. There's no question about it. When you're faced with new challenges, for example, and let's think about the war in Ukraine. you know, when we are called upon to draw our red lines, because everybody has to do it. And I say that with respect to the fragmentation that exists both at national politics and European politics, and the real issues, you know, that exist. And for example, and I know we're going to talk about it for sure today, the far right. You know, there's a far left as well, but there's a far right. And it is imperative for us to always define those red lines. For example, when Russia attacked Ukraine, for us, it was clear that what defines us versus parties to our right that we cannot cooperate with is not only pro-Europe, pro-rule of law, pro-NATO, it's also pro-Ukraine. You know. So I think this is a living exercise, a dynamic exercise. If it wasn't, we would become politically irrelevant.
Thank you.
So that's how you do it.
Thank you. Can I follow on that, and also then ask every one of you as well? You mentioned the war in Ukraine. What do you expect, you know, from the EPP point of view, to be the three or some, you know, three of the biggest issues? Let's put it like that. In the upcoming campaign, what are you planning to focus on? Is the war in Ukraine one of those three topics, or what would those three topics be, very briefly?
To be honest with you, I think that the war in Ukraine is not going to be. It's obviously going to be exposed in our manifestos and our political programs, but I'm very sure that we are aligned with my dear friends and colleagues here at this table here about our unequivocal support of Ukraine. So it's not going to be an issue of contention.
Okay.
What we are going to talk about, obviously, in one way or the other, is jobs, jobs, jobs. Call it, you know, whatever you want, but essentially this is ultimately what we're going to be talking about.
Thank you.
For us, that's our meat and potatoes. It's always been, and it will continue to be.
Jobs, 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 the three main topics or issues for the EPP. ALDE, what would be the three biggest issues from your perspective right now?
I think I'm really proud about the work we did also is to listen to our voters. We spend a lot of resources in surveys, but also in listening what people do. And even our manifesto process is slightly different from the ones here around the table in getting more input. So that is really something that I'm quite happy about. And I think there you can see that the element of cost of living is an issue for members, and I think we have to acknowledge it. It has an influence. And then there are elements of response we can have to it, and just the element of the security, which is very large, and because security includes security of supply, includes energy, includes a dimension. I think that is a response where the solutions are not mutually exclusive, and this is a bit of our unique selling point, if I can talk a bit on a corporate way, is that we really believe that you can have both a strong economy, but really, if you link it with innovation, to reach a very ambitious environmental goal. And we really, this is not a slogan or a way to position it, but these solutions are not mutually exclusive, and that is also part of the elements we'll do up. And then we still have this in our DNA. It's this element that we really, really like the EU, but we are reformist on that level, and we have a lot of questions and points that we'd like to raise. So there you go for the three elements that we will, among those that we will raise.
Thank you very much. Same question for the Greens. What will be three of the biggest issues that you plan to focus on?
Well, first of all, as my colleague said, we also have a very democratic process to inform what is going to be our campaign. So I can only now speak, of course, for the trends that I see currently in the family, and of course that I'm pretty sure will remain as some of our main goals in this campaign. For sure, we will insist on the crisis of our generation being the climate crisis, and how to make sure that the cost for the transition that we need for the climate crisis are moved from the citizens to those who really need to pay for it, and how to ensure that the transition is just. So this will be very much, and it is the core of our political project. But also, I think none of us in the Greens is unaware of the kind of changes the last 3-4 years have been brought to Europe, have been bringing to Europe. And so I think that we will focus also a lot on the kind of idea of Europe we want. Today, I don't think that the debate is going to be so much about being pro-European or anti-European. We see also very conservative and far-right parties have moved from very Eurosceptic positions to kind of, yeah, we like Europe, we're gonna remain positions. But the problem is with the idea of Europe that they have, which is intergovernmental, regressive, very, 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 very far from everything we fight for. So I think that this will be one of the trends of our campaign, also to make sure to explain citizens what is the difference between our idea for the European Union and the idea of others, and also for sure trying to reach for alliances with the civil societies, but also with other parties to make sure that we push for a real pro-European project. And of course, everything that has to do also with the international dimension. Yeah, I agree, of course, that the war in Ukraine is not going to be a contentious element among at least the biggest democratic pro-European parties, but I think it will have an impact in the way in which we're going to talk about the next European elections, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Benedetta. Giacomo, what's going to be for socialists?
So, to say clearly out loud at the beginning, as Thanasis and Benedetta said it as well, there is no doubt that our support for Ukraine will continue to be, as it has been in this past year, a consensual basis within our movement. That is, I feel pretty confident in saying that this will be very clearly stated in our Congress document and in our political manifesto for the electoral campaign. But if you ask what are the main issues that we will be working on, then we need to see on the consequences of the war in Ukraine for the European citizens, for their daily lives, as well as we need to look back at the consequences that COVID had into our economies, into our societies, because the impact that those two crises are having in Europe are of a magnitude that we are still exploring, in the sense that the story is not over, unfortunately, yet. So our focus is to make sure that the European Union is ready to deliver answers that can make our citizens feel secure and protected into this transition that we have begun under this mandate. I'm referring to the Green Deal transition, which is the most transformational process that the European Union is undergoing now, and that with the impact of COVID, with the impact of the war in Ukraine, this has to be dealt with in a very careful manner. So yes, indeed, it's jobs, but it is also access to health, it is education, it is all the spectrum of social affairs that have to be taken care of. It is therefore cost of living, it is housing, it is a lot of, the shopping list can be extremely long. So I'm not going to reduce it to 3, because it's impossible to do it now, and I think it will also be difficult to do it when we get closer to the campaign. But it is on what the European Union can deliver as such to maintain the transition ongoing and to respond to the multiple crises that we have been affected in the past couple of years.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, please.
I'm reducing it to 1 for the following reason. And it doesn't have to do with our history as a political party and our pro-business stance or anything like that. It has to do with the fact that for us, at the European People's Party, people remain at the core of what we do and what we want to do in the future. And the issue is this: we have major initiatives on the table at the EU level that we need to guarantee that people are behind them. We need everybody behind them. But people have their fundamental concerns at stake first and foremost. Make sure that they get a good salary for good work, they can send their kids to school, they have access to excellent health care, proper health care, daycare, etc., etc. That's an integral part of reaching out to society and making them a part of the effort to support the environment and do a lot of other things that these big top policy projects of the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? And this is, I think, fundamental as we approach elections, because we need to ask ourselves a question. Have we done enough to bring Europe to our citizens?
Thank you. So I think there's a lot of agreement, or there is agreement, of course, on Ukraine. I think the pro-democratic parties around the table from center left to center right, I think there's no doubt about that, that you all agree on this. I think we already saw a little bit of a different, perhaps, focus on how much to really reduce it to one topic versus more than one topic, and of course the particular thematic focus also there's of course quite some difference. But let me ask you on the outlook for the European elections, Giacomo, if I may start with you here. So the last time that the PS had a majority in the EU Parliament was in the 2000s. So do you plan to go for first this time? Do you plan to go for second? What's your ambition? And I will also ask you, everyone else, about that. But what's your ambition for this election?
We don't play politics to have fun or to party.
Also.
In the sense that it's indeed an enjoyable work, and it fills my life with a lot of motivation and purposes. But the game is to win, it's not to participate. It's not like having a sport competition in school. So I read the polls as you all do. There is, it's not a secret. But things can change. When we started to have the electoral campaign in Germany a couple of years ago, the SPD was reaching, a few months before the elections, his lowest potential score in the history of the country, of the democratic period of the country, meaning less than 15%. And then, a few months afterwards, they scored 25. And today, the Chancellor of Germany is Olaf Scholz. So I cannot bind myself, ourselves, our movement, the political elaboration of our manifesto, the selection of our Spitzencandidate to the current state of play of the polls. Our game is to go full in with our proposals, with a good candidate, in order to win these elections, not to participate.
Thank you very much. So you're going for a win.
Otherwise, there is no sense in what we're doing.
Understood.
It's not for witnessing democracy. We want to be part of democracy, but we want to also have our ideas walking in the legs of our candidates, mobilize our people, and convince as many European citizens that it's worth to believe in the European Union integration process under the point of view of socialists, social democrats, progressive movements that have a vision for the future of this continent.
Thanks a lot. Benedetta, for the Greens, it has also not been necessarily the most welcoming political climate over the last months in some polls, in some countries. Some commentators observed that there might be some kind of green backlash. So how do you deal with that? How do you plan to tackle that when it comes to European election?
Well, first of all, we see it also here, how conflictualized green policies are becoming. Yeah? So we see it from already the comments from some of our speakers here, and we believe that this is a step back because we felt that in the last mandate in the European Parliament and the European legislation, there was a very strong consensual will from the main political forces, also in the majority, to move forward with the Green Deal. And now, especially in view of the campaign, we see some political forces making steps back, and this is, we believe, very preoccupying. We also are, of course, preoccupied by everyone else here about, as I said earlier, the fact that the cost of the transition should not be burdened by citizens and should not be contributing to the sense of insecurity that European citizens are feeling right now. So that's why we, wherever we are in government or also in all of our operations in the European Parliament, always side a very strong social policy to whatever environmental or green policy proposals we make. For sure, we are going to do more to make sure that our citizens and our voters understand that our project is holistic and doesn't want to increase the burden for the citizens, but at the same time, we can't stop the ambition and we can't stop the European Union to be the pioneer in the green transformation, because if we stop doing that, then we will have a major backlash also at the global level. So this is very clear for us. We believe that we cannot do step backs in this regard, and we believe that also climate crisis, Didrik was talking about the polling and the research that we do ahead of the European elections. We know climate and environment are among the highest preoccupations of all European citizens. You look at the droughts that are happening in the south of Europe. There are parts of Europe that are unlivable, like literally. I come from the south of Italy. I know what I'm talking about. So we want to deliver a project that people can identify with, that they can feel, of course, secure about, but also that is ambitious enough to tackle the crisis.
Thank you. And briefly, do you have an ambition, I don't know, of overtaking ALDE in third place, for example? Or is there some kind of goal that you set yourself?
For sure, we don't do politics in order to only win seats.
Sure.
So that's the first point that I like. We want to win seats and we want to grow bigger, because we want to put forward our policies and we want to contribute also to the majority of the next European Parliament, hoping that it will be a democratic pro-European one, in order to make sure that our common goals are met. Yeah? So that's our, for sure, perspective. We want to have a bigger group, and we also want to have more representation from different parts of Europe. This is our general framework.
So growth is what it's about, and becoming more diverse also in terms of countries.
Yes.
Thank you. Didrik, ALDE also had to face a few difficult election results over the last months, like in Spain. So how do you how do you plan to make up for potential losses in big and important EU countries on a national level?
We are, the information we have now, again, benefiting from the fact that I was active in 2019, it doesn't look the same way, right? So we are in an element where there's no catastrophe coming on, but it's not an easy guaranteed gain, which it never is. I would like to add some nuance to what was brought up in the approach, is that it's not, indeed it's about a win, but it's not that much about seats, we haven't been given the full driver's seat, right? That you cannot say. We've been very influential as being in the middle, a bit the kingmakers. They usually have difficulties getting along on some policies, so we're very comfortable about being able to help switch the votes on one side or the other one. However, we haven't been given the driver's seat. So at one point, we want to be the alternative to the extremes which are not contributing to finding a solution. That is our opinion. So what we are aiming for is to maintain the power, not the power in number of seats as much. We'll take it, don't get me wrong. We'll take the first or second position. But what matters to us is to remain that we can sell our ideas the best and that we can implement the change in a stronger position. So I think this partially answers your question, but that is really what we're going for, is to maintain the power to do the changes that we think is necessary in a democratic way.
So I guess all of the parties here want to govern as their center-left to center-right, and I think this is quite clear. Thanasis, there has been some articles over the last weeks and months about a potential divide between, the Commission and the EPP, and that the EPP is starting to campaign, being critical on, climate change, nature restoration, agriculture standards. Do you see a gain in there for you, or do you see a strategy in there that you will also realize in the campaign, or how do you go about that?
First of all, let me say that the EPP's commitment to the green transition is unequivocal. However, there's no asterisks to that at all. But what I want to say is this: pragmatic, real-life policies require that you have to be flexible. You have to be aware of issues that come up. You have to address them. Now, what we saw as the EPP, and we kind of raised the bell and rang the bell here, is that farmers are suffering. Not necessarily as a result of the policies in place, but also because of the war in Ukraine. So, what we did, and we think this is the politically correct thing to do, is raise our hands and say, guys, we gotta focus at this moment in time a little bit on our farmers because they are suffering. And when you do things like that, they come with a risk. And the risk is you sometimes become accused of putting water in your wine and kind of, stepping back on your commitments. I don't think this is the case. I know this is not the case. But I think prudent policy making on the ground requires that we are aware of what's happening, that we adjust, that we are flexible, and that we meet the demands of our citizens. This is a critical ingredient of good governance.
Well,
I see.
Well,
just for the record.
you feel it. Do you feel it?
I do.
When Thanasis said at the beginning that for them it's jobs, 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 I said to myself, this is going to be an easy debate because this is what our president, Stefan Löfven, former Prime Minister of Sweden, and former trade union leaders always say at the beginning of everything. It's always jobs, jobs, jobs. Then we can talk about our differentiation on how to define quality jobs. But we will enter into that if you want at a later stage. But now that we talk about the Green Deal and the transition that we are going through and the unequivocal support of the EPP, I feel even more reassured that we are definitely on the same page. However, I cannot ignore the fact that what has happened in the past couple of weeks in Strasbourg first and in Brussels yesterday on the nature restoration law gives me a different impression. And while we all agree that, and I think we really do agree on this table, that the Green Deal transition doesn't have to leave anybody behind and has to be understood, supported, and brought on, carried on with the citizens' favor, we see a major political force that struck with us a deal at the beginning of this mandate by supporting the Ursula von der Leyen Commission, which was considering the Green Deal an integral part of this pact. It was a legislature pact. Now, jeopardizing the support to the nature restoration law, which is aiming at supporting farmers, guaranteeing food security for our citizens, and granting biodiversity to continue on our continent. And I can continue on all the positive aspects of this central pillar of the Green Deal. It's, if you allow me to brutalize it, sounds to be more of an electoral game that the EPP is preparing to put in place in view of the next European electoral campaign.
Thank you.
And this, sorry, but is not what we would have expected from the EPP. I'm an old boy and I come from Rome. And there is this ancient Roman wisdom motto that says, pacta sunt servanda. If we had an agreement, then we should honor the agreement. And to play the way it has been played by replacing members of the EPP group from one committee to the others in order to secure that there would have been less favorable votes in the committee, honestly, not the best game in town.
So I see a division line here, and I think Benedetta also might want to add to
I can
that.
only second what my colleague said, but I just want to add that, I mean, we can't say that we want to have a transition that is backed by citizens and then do everything we can to make them not back this transition, because this is what EPP is doing today and what EPP is preparing to do in view of the campaign for the next European elections, and this is quite clear. And I hope this debate wouldn't turn to become a debate on the nature restoration law, so this is why I try to kind of be not too explicit about it, but now that this has been, of course, thrown, I think it is preoccupying. I also know that a lot of people within EPP disagree with this strategy. So we really, really very much hope that there will be a turn into how parties positions themselves towards the campaign, and not only on this, but in general on these very worrying signs that we received in the last months of opening up to coalitions with forces that are, to be honest, very far from being democratic and pro-European. So that is something that for sure I believe we need to work on. We need to, and I think it's very good that we have occasions to meet among indeed democratic pro-European forces so that we can state out loud how much we want to be in favor of a political project that is going in the right direction in that sense.
Thank you. I didn't ask you one question. Very briefly, can you comment on the ambition? Is it staying in first place? Is it, there also have been some more difficult polls over the last months. What's the aim, what's the ambition of the EPP for the coming election?
Well, you participate in order to win because you want your ideas to frame the policies that will come. There's no question about that. You're not an observer. What I can tell you is I'm feeling very confident about the center-right in Europe. Kyriakos Mitsotakis won a landslide victory in Greece. Petteri Orpo did an amazing job in Finland. Alberto Feijóo in Spain had a resounding victory in local elections, and I think this will be seen again on July 23rd. And I think this is reflective of our political strength.
Thank you.
Just let me just mention one thing which I didn't mention, is Donald Tusk in Poland. And here, who I think is a hero, to be honest with you, beyond the EPP, beyond politics, beyond partisanship. I think we should all support what he's doing in Poland against the government.
Thank you. Well,
that is exceptionally autocratic and needs to go.
thank you. As we are today looking at the EU election, what I would like to ask you is a question from the from the audience. Do you want to also? say something?
No, I'd really like that. I think
Yeah,
it's gets a
yeah.
bit,
Let's
it's
so
time for questions
let's
because we've
exactly.
spoken enough.
Let's move on. So the one question from the audience is, and you can really do it a thumbs up or thumbs down. Will there's already been some talk about lead candidates. So will your party, your European party, in the upcoming European election campaign, field lead candidate or the German word of Spitzenkandidat? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Actually,
2 thumbs up. So we have actually
Interesting.
some have 2 thumbs up.
I think he has to explain that.
no.
You'll have 2 spitzings?
No. It was because we really support the element. The reality
We
is that no. But this is indeed one element where it's an imperfect system, but it's a system that makes it more operational, and we have people that defend ideas. I mean, there's the Nordics. They love this Eurovision music contest. Well, we got 2 Eurovision debates between presidents of the commissions, and that was really interesting. I saw them both. Okay, it's a bit niche. There was, I think, it was 1.2 million who watched the first one, 1.5 the other one. That's hardly anything. But for once, we have real discussion, and some operational things came out. Those nerds of us here that watched the 2014 debate, we got Guy Verhofstadt, man of his age, with a page saying, if I structured a commission, then I would like a vice presidents and having commissioners responding to them. So there are things that come out of this that are very operational. And if one thing, your audience, if they're willing to watch this thing, they should definitely watch the next Eurovision debate so that we bring it to at least 2 million or 2.5 million people that watch it. But that is embryonic, but the start of a real campaign.
Great. Well, I have a follow-on question from that, because of course last time in 2019 the Spitzenkandidat thing, had its challenges. Let's put it like that. So do you expect this time to be different, so that then actually the people who run then also get into office, or what may be different this time around?
Actually, I don't mind responding to that one too, because it's imperfect, this system. And we have an inside joke of who killed the Spitzenkandidat. People say it's coming up with more candidates. Some people say not suggesting the right person. That's a different question. Depends what your ambitions were. Our ambitions was to have a real embryonic European campaign. It wasn't directly about running for jobs, because it's a bit awkward. Applying for a job, that's one thing. I know what that is. But running to say you want to have power to change is a different one. So the system is imperfect, but it has succeeded twice in a row, not only to give some sort of a debate, but also to increase, at very tiny numbers, let's get that right, but increase voting turnout. So if we get that in 2019, I didn't really follow up on that one, but I said I won't look at the ALDE results. I will first look at the turnout. I was too much under pressure. I did look at the ALDE results first. But right after that, I looked at the voting turnout. And for 4 hours, we had 0.7% increase. Not that much. Ended up being a little bit less. But still, if this is something that it brings, then it has succeeded. And these 2 systems are imperfect, but they worked.
Thank you very much.
But
What do the others think?
I think that there is a major difference here from what Didrik, at least he just said. I mean, with the Greens, for sure, are going to go for, 2 Spitzenkandidates. So that's our peculiarity. We always go for 2. But they are going to run for becoming president of the European Commission. So for us,
So they're running for office.
Clear. They're running for office. For us, the leading candidate is a system that is meant to structure our way towards a more democratic European Union and much more real European elections. So it's a step forward towards structuring, and I agree it's imperfect because unfortunately it's not accompanied by the real opportunity for citizens to vote for European parties and transnational lists. So it is imperfect, but we still are very much backing it as a pillar for us for the next European elections.
Can I also ask for quick answers from Socialists and EPP? Will your Spitzenkandidaten run for office like with the Greens, or not necessarily run for office like with ALDE? What will your strategy be?
So, it is in our statutes. We honor our statutes, and it is in our statutes for a reason. We believe that the lead candidate system, which for easiness we call the Spitzencandidate, is a tool to promote participation, to engage our parties in a mobilizing campaign, and therefore to give a contribution to the overall legitimacy to the European Union institutional framework. So we stick to that. But your original question was about how do you see this happening since it failed the last time, and then what do you think will happen this time? I think it depends very much on our own parties and the way we want to engage in this. If we are serious about this process, then the process is going to be successful. If we are not totally serious about this process, then there is a high risk to jeopardize it
And
again.
being serious would mean?
PES is going for one Spitzen candidate for the position of the President of the European Commission. I can understand the tradition of the Greens to go for a couple, one woman, one man, granting gender equality, double Spitzel,
Or two women.
Spitzen.
Also possible.
There is
you
also
cannot do
that
it.
I didn't know.
I didn't know either.
I'm learning. But
An element of
go-
clarification,
excuse
just.
me, excuse me, that is the question. To go with a plethora of candidates
No, it
is
is.
not exactly going to be beneficial, I believe, to the game of clarifying the electoral campaign system and then the delivery of the result.
No.
Quick clarification, then I would like
Quick
more
clarification, we had a resolutions at our Stockholm Congress where we were asking for one candidate. The reality is, it happened also in 18, and we didn't get the results that we wanted, so that was a little bit my inside caution. But the reality is, the ALDE party has committed to having one single lead candidate for the elections.
EPP. Will EPP field a lead candidate that will run for office?
Yes, it's in our statutes, just like it's in your statutes, we will honor. But what I want to mention is this. Yesterday, the Home Affairs
Yes.
meeting basically rejected the lead candidate process. And you see here today, 4 political parties, doing exactly the opposite. We're all gonna be judged by our commitments. We're all gonna be judged by our decisions, and we're all gonna be judged by what we do. Us too. There's no question about it. But fundamentally, here I think in this table we're in absolute agreement that this is a step forward, and we should continue it. So we will.
Thank you. Very quickly.
No, objectively, when's the last time you saw council members super excited about saying, yeah, let's get the Spitzenkandidat? Because there's never been enthusiasm, but the process has been happening. So I don't think that should deter us and fear
No,
us
it will make
about
us
the fact.
even stronger.
It
about
makes it even stronger. And I think maybe if you look at the parliament, having a little bit of a tough time with the 2 crises, giving a lot of power to the commission in the elements. So if I was an MEP, I'd feel a bit like it's time to. I understand there's a war, there's been a health crisis, but we cannot be sidelined systematically. And I think in its imperfections, it is still a step forward.
Thank you. Let's move on to technology. We understand that you are all competitors, so you will not share trade secrets. Still, of course, AI is all the rage at the moment. Is there anything you can share around, how your parties or your European party are going to deploy technology differently than in the past, and how they make use of potentially AI tools in the campaign?
I'm too old for AI.
Makes you think of it.
Shall we?
Please.
I think it was really Stefan Löfven who said it when he was Prime Minister in Sweden, but I hope I'm not mistaken. I do not fear artificial intelligence, I fear human stupidity. And many others have used this sentence.
Yes.
Everything can be used as a tool, so we should not be afraid of new technology arising, but we need to regulate it. We need to put it at the service of our citizens and of our democratic functioning. If AI becomes a tool to promote the proliferation of stereotypes, influencing negatively the public debate around the political process, or interfering and jeopardizing finally what would be instead a normal outcome of the democratic debate in our society, then we need to preserve ourselves and defend our democracy against it. If it is regulated as it is happening in Parliament under the leadership of Brando Benifei from Italy and a Renew member, I don't remember his name, but they are rapporteurs on the topic, putting it on the right track, then everything can be welcomed.
But can I quickly jump in?
But as PES, we are not going to use AI to convince our citizens to vote for us.
So PS here is not going to make use of AI-based tools.
Look, I speak a terrible English because I'm Italian and I'm not a native speaker. I could have tried with ChatGPT to have a few blocks in order to be prepared and answer to this interesting question in a perfect British English, but I don't. That's not the game we want to play.
Yeah.
And this is it. We are going to use all the potential social media tools in order to reach out as many citizens as possible, especially the younger generation, but we are not going to enhance our political campaigning tools with tricks. Let's put it like that.
Understood. So, ALDE and Greens, will you, as a party, or are you aware of your parties using AI-based tools in some ways, or are planning to use it in the campaign?
Well, in our case, first of all, we share a lot of caution. We are, of course, very interested in the developments. We think we should really not sideline the possibilities that not only artificial intelligence, but in general, technological developments can bring into campaigning in order to reach out to more people, but with a degree of caution that it's very, very high, because of course we see already preoccupying uses of artificial intelligence to prepare and to promote fake news and disinformation, and to manipulate also debates from outside, which is also a very worrying
That's also a question from the audience.
Foreign interference. We are for sure going to experiment internally to understand the tools. Without probably having massive recours, like we're not going to use them for sure in this campaign a massive way, also because we want to keep a high degree of cautiousness. We are in contact with the authority that already has, for European political parties, that has already given us some guidelines of things and red lines that we shouldn't cross. So for sure we will follow very closely in our relations with the authority, the way in which potentially using this tool. We didn't make a political decision yet, but we are, of course, as Greens, very much on the front line of also regulating this. And when it comes to our political parties, I think our member parties, I think they share more or less a similar position to ours.
Thank you. ALDE.
Well, it's a bit of a thing now, both digital intelligence, etc. Very operationally, we were running a campaign 2014 when EPP-PS couldn't spell Facebook yet. That was at the time. We have a more that's driven on. So I think here the answer to your question is, first of all, there is no direct plan of using AI for the campaign. However, there is such a myriad of things before that, particularly data-driven elements, reflections that are there. So I'm not saying a no forever because I'd like to see, but of course we respect the rules. But right now there are currently no plans.
Thank you.
AI
So we have basically no yes, maybe here on the panel.
It's well summed up.
Disinformation is the problem.
Disinformation is a problem.
That's
Yes.
the problem.
That's the real.
Absolutely.
That's a problem for all of us.
Absolutely.
And we've had such a fight with the social media providers about. I mean, basically they killed the single market, right? Because we're not allowed to actually. No, but it's true. I cannot promote my socialist friends. I cannot promote liberals in Italy from here. I'm stuck to promote in Belgium, and trust me, the Belgians. I know the market. It's not the game changer for us here, and this has been a real issue. And so, if we have a rule about but you see the element is that we're a bit stuck. Our hands are tied. You cannot promote.
Now that's a discussion
Yes.
we should.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now that's a discussion
fight
should we have.
against.
I mean, the limitations imposed upon us
Yes.
by the European Parliament in doing our jobs.
How will it impact your campaigns?
Well, that's not, that's not the issue. Listen, we were established, political parties were established to do one thing, to be part of the debate, right? To contribute to the debate. Political parties were not established to be catering services or to host events and put a nice decor behind our leaders' meetings. Political parties were established to be part of the debate. And the way things are right now, all of us, I think, and I hope my good colleagues agree with me, have our hands and legs tied behind our backs when by the European Parliament in exploring the options we have in doing this fundamental job. And I think that should be the question. The European Parliament, of course, when 90% of our financing comes from them, have a say. There's no question about that. But the integrity of our work, not us as individuals, that may be questioned, but the integrity of our political work cannot be questioned.
Understood. Any other comments?
No,
on
I'm glad to hear what Thanasis just said, because at the beginning he gave a reading of what a European political party is that I disagreed with, which was that we exist also to serve our member parties, which is not what the EGP is there for. We are, of course, there to serve our member parties, but we are there, and you said very well now, to contribute to the Europeanization of the debate and to the Europeanization of the democracy, of the European Union, and to also, in our case, very much strengthen our parties in policy making, for example, in areas that they're not. So I was thinking now with artificial intelligence, for sure, the work that we will do will influence a lot of our parties. So indeed, I think that the regulations that do not allow us to accomplish that, mission, they are limiting. But there is a lot of the limits that we have that are there to make sure that we indeed do European politics. And I think this is important also to acknowledge, because we are there also to do European politics and not to do national politics. So in that sense, maybe I see things a little bit more nuanced than Thanasis. But in general, I agree with the fact that we have a lot of burdens in place that make our life more difficult.
Very
than
quickly.
they should.
Thank you, Benedetta.
We've been criticized in the past. Not very nice. 1976, two things. We were considered as a bunch of old men, mostly just doing resolutions and networking, right? Not very nice for European political parties. Maybe a little true until 92. 92 Maastricht, we got the first role where indeed we have to defend European values, and we have an element of, and that really changed. And we were a bit criticized to be glorified event organizers, just getting our PMs and our leaders together. Not very nice, maybe a little bit true. But since the Spitzen, since the lead candidate, we have this element of debating, of putting the European questions forward. So our scope has risen even more now in practical since the creation of the parties, and we have to be given the hands to actually do that at European level. And there, I agree on your points. With an element of clarification, it's the authority of governing European political parties that is the issue here, not the Parliament as such. It's an organ that have an interpretation that we find quite limited of the Article 17. Well, should never quote articles. Anyway, from
Thank you.
Maastricht.
Thank you.
Don't.
So we're almost at the end. My last question to you before we unfortunately have to end this discussion today is, if you would give your member parties an advice for the upcoming election, what would it be? Giacomo, may I start with you? What advice would you give the member parties of the PS for the next 12 months?
The European elections is a European election. It can not only be considered a national test of support or lack of support to the current government in place in that specific country. If it is an important element, and therefore I slightly disagree with Benedetta, we are to serve our member parties, and we want to support them in their country to win elections if they're in opposition, to win over the party that is in government, or if they are in government, to continue lead in the national context. But they need to have the European dimension as a crucial one, because that would be the turning point that would attract more voters to show up. Didrik mentioned it. There has been a slight little increase with the introduction of the Spitzen candidate. It makes us more than proud, because it was, if you want, the whole concept of the Spitzen came from also Martin Schulz and his determination to push our own family to accept this procedure to be put in place back in 2014, starting with our Congress in 2009. But I don't want to do the history of it. I just want to say that it is the European dimension that can attract more voters to join the party.
Thank you very much, Giacomo.
It is a party of democracy, the European elections, and it is a celebration of the greatest project of multi-state integration without conflicts.
Thank you.
It's a project of peace, and we should be reminding ourselves, especially with what has been happening at our borders, that the European Union project is a project of peace.
Thank you. Benedetta, what would you advise your member parties?
Yes, indeed, to be very, very pro-European, to allow European debate to enter into their houses. This is very difficult. It is hard because when you don't have, when you have medias that are dominated, of course, by national topics, when you don't have properly European public opinion, of course, it's very hard. But we should never be limiting ourselves, and this is why, as others said, the personification element of this campaign, so the leading candidate, is so important because it can allow us to have debates, it can allow us to confront the different positions, and it can allow us for us to have people that can represent what we stand for. So for sure to be as committed to the common elements of our campaign as much as possible, but also to go into this campaign with confidence, boldness, being aware that the European Union needs the Greens and that the project that we are bringing is currently very much in tune with the preoccupation of the population and especially of the young generation.
Thanks, Benedetta. Didrik, your advice.
Well, ALDE member parties, if you're watching, my advice would be very clearly, it's to say, first of all, you can have a campaign if you listen and if you empathize with the input of the people. Base yourself on that. Be honest on what the EU has brought. Be critical about the EU and how it's going right now. But if you are wondering, I can tell you there is a list of parties that ran very successful campaigns with a critical, realistic, but pro-European campaign.
Thank you, Didrik. Mr. Bakolas, you have
This
the
amazing
last word.
experiment was built for peace. You're right. It was to secure peace for Europe, and that should never escape our minds. We should also reflect on the past 4 years, 5 years of this current institutional cycle and look at a few things we did well as Europe. Common vaccinations, with the recovery fund, energy cap. Europe does matter. It can matter more, and parties need to embrace this. This is, European elections are not another round of campaigns in our national countries. They're about Europe, and we need to fight for them.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for participating. Thanks for the audience at home. I think it was a great debate. We covered a lot. Of course, we cannot cover everything. All the best to you all for the election campaign. And with that, I wish you a good day.
Thank you.
Party, party.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.